This video is about inversions and their musical implications and how we analyze them in contemporary harmony. So an inversion is when you have a chord with a note other than the root and the bass, a chord tone other than the root and the bass. Here's a classic root position chord, version of C right there. And this will, if I ignore the bass note for a minute, let's get rid of the bass note. If I were to change the position of the root up an octave, I would now have the third in the bass, and that would be considered a so-called first inversion. If I put this up an octave, now I have the fifth in the bass, that would be called a second inversion. In contemporary music, we would call this a C chord. We would call this a C over E chord. We would call this a C over G chord. And our analysis would be as follows. Our C over E, if we were in the key of C, would be analyzed as Roman numeral 1 over its third. Now notice that the third is a traditional number, an Arabic number. That's because we use these kinds of numbers for single notes, and E is a single note, and we use Roman numerals for chords, which are the C is a chord. The E is a note, the C is a chord. If it was a different chord in the key, again, we're relating this to the chord of the moment. So the analysis for this, for example, would be 5, it's the 5 chord in the key of C, over its fifth. Not D, we're not analyzing D in relation to the key of C, we're analyzing it in relation to the chord G. It's the fifth of the chord G. That's the way we analyze them. If it's a seventh chord, now you can have another inversion. You could have a seventh in the bass. And again, we're analyzing in relation to the chord, not the key. But it just so happens with C major 7, the B is both the seventh of the key and the seventh of the chord. If we did a different chord for a minute, why don't we make this an A minor 7? The chord symbol would be A minor over C. And the analysis would be 6 minor 7 over its flat 3. The C being the single note, the flat third of this chord, the minor third of this chord. If we were in C minor, this would be 1 minor 7 with B flat in the bass. That's the flat 7 of that chord, so it would be 1 minor 7 over the flat 7. Not 1 minor 7 over 7, because that would imply major. You have to remember whole numbers imply major or perfect intervals. If an interval is anything other than a major or perfect interval, then we have to use the prefix flat, to meaning 1/2 step less than major or perfect, or sharp, meaning 1/2 step more than major or perfect. Okay, so that's it in a nutshell of how we analyze it. There's a couple more things to keep in mind. If you're analyzing an ensemble, more than one instrument, then you have to take into account the bass notes. So even if this upper part was C over E, but the lowest sound in the band was C, this would not be analyzed as C over E. It would be analyzed as C, just C major, because the lowest sound is still the root. Only if this bass note were to go up to E, then it would be called C over E. Even if this was root position, if that E was below it, that would be called C over E. And you can hear the musical effect. This is the most powerful, strong, clear expression of the chord. And this is a slightly weaker, just slightly more transitory version of the chord. That's what we get from inversions. We get different flavors of the same chord. So that's it. That's how we analyze them in contemporary harmony. Now, how do we apply them? Well, one of the most powerful ways to apply them is to create stepwise bass motion, like something like this. You can see that effect, that directional effect you get from creating a stepwise bass by using inversions. Let's listen to a little Bach. I have a sort of a rough equivalent of what's going on harmonically. So you can hear the power of that stepwise bass. Here's a classic rock song that is very inspired by the music of Bach, based on the music of Bach, with a very powerful stepwise bass created by using inversions. Okay, so that's a little snapshot of what inversions are, how do we analyze them in contemporary music, and what their musical effect can be, or a little bit about what their musical effect can be. They can be used for lots of cool things, but creating stepwise motion, at least into the very next chord, but sometimes a whole chain of chords, is a really wonderful use of inversions and a powerful use of inversions.